right. So for this week 32, switching gears a little bit, excuse me, we'll wrap up the little mini section on humor and satire with this argument essay 3. So that's a clue for you. And then on Tuesday, we'll kick off the Crucible, which will occupy us for the next few weeks. So we will have our last vocabulary quiz on Tuesday, of course. Tuesday will mostly be devoted to introducing the Crucible, starting to think about themes and context and stuff of that nature. And then nothing really going on for Wednesday. No extra remote learning stuff, just kind of wrapping up previous week stuff. And then Thursday and Friday, B-Day group is actually going to start reading and start watching The Crucible in class. And for A-Day, you guys will do that on Monday and Tuesday of next week. So I do have these questions here, and this will pretty much be the only set of questions for the Crucible. So B-Day crew, you'll be able to theoretically start on these questions at the end of this week. But A-Day, you may actually want to wait until we get some content next Monday and Tuesday. So I wouldn't worry about those for now. I made the due date pretty far away, so hopefully that shouldn't make you pressed for time or anything. So anyways, I'm going to go over the stuff for Tuesday now. So if you're an A-Day student and you're going to be here on Tuesday, then you can check out. But B-Day crew, if you want to kind of hear some background verbally, then I'll talk about that. This one item, the political cartoons, this is something I'll do with A-Day group physically, so that's why I don't have it published so that they can't see anything. But for you guys, I'll show you kind of what we're going to discuss in class, and you can kind of perform the exercise or not as you choose. So anyways, my introduction to the Crucible actually starts out dealing with some political cartoon content. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you each cartoon in turn. And obviously, your ability to interpret visual sources is something that will potentially be tested on the synthesis essay. So some good kind of practice and review for that. But I'll show you each cartoon in turn and give you a moment to think about it. And feel free to obviously pause this video and think as much as you need to about what this visual source might be trying to say. And then I'll give you some context. All right. So this first cartoon here, the only serious context that I can give you is the year. This was in 1947, if you can see down there in the corner. So if I have any U.S. history folks, and I think most of you either took AP U.S. history or had U.S. history with Mr. Bell last semester, then you may have a slight advantage here. But just pause for a moment to think, what is this visual source trying to tell us? What political message is being conveyed here? Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to think about that. So if you know anything about the Committee on Un-American Activities around the year 1947, that was an organization in our government that was designed to root out communists. So you can see the caption up here, "It's okay, we're hunting communists." So the idea being presented here, of course, by this vehicle, this symbolic representation of the House of Un-American Activities, running over people willy-nilly and hurting, seemingly innocent pedestrians along the way, is that even though they were hunting communists and they felt that, the ends justified the means, if they could find communists in our government, then, if innocent people got hurt along the way, it didn't matter. The reality was that, people's lives were being destroyed by this committee and by this communist hunt which often turned out, not to have much to do with actual communists. So, a little bit more context. The Cold War revived the anti-communist hysteria that gripped the United States after World War I. So, 1947 was the year that the House Committee on Un-American Activities was revived. It started in the 1930s, but it was declared by President Truman to be itself the most un-American activity. So when it came back in 1947, it was not well received. But under J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI helped provide this committee with material from raw files that led to a number of interrogations and interviews and trials. And a lot of people, producers, directors, screenwriters, they didn't want to testify. They didn't want to name people. And thus it led to them being blacklisted and their lives being ruined because they didn't want to throw anybody under the bus, so to speak, or, under the car. All right. Next political cartoon. Think for a moment. All right. So here we have the call of fire. So we have little individual representative of hysteria, because people do terrible things sometimes when they are afraid, climbing up the ladder with some water, about to put out the fire. But that fire looks awfully familiar, doesn't it? In fact, it seems to be the fire of the Statue of Liberty, a powerful symbolic representation of our country. And by putting out this fire, are we actually putting out something that is a dangerous threat, or are we extinguishing the very liberty of our country? All right, so a little more context for that. By 1949, Soviets had expanded their control. Communism was gripping Eastern Europe, and China was at risk of falling to communism as well. So the spread of communism abroad increased anxieties at home being America, of course. So the fact that communism was spreading on the other side of the ocean made a lot of people afraid it was going to come to the United States. And by trying to stamp out communism in the United States, it, of course, threatened American liberties as well. Right, next comic. All right, hopefully, looking at this, you correctly identified that the target of the anti-subversive committees, the anti-communist committees, at one point became poor little teachers. So the caption up there, "You read books, eh?" kind of implies that there's a lot of activity in the education field that was perceived as being subversive, that really was completely innocent and completely unrelated to promoting communism. So having a map with the USSR on it, well, obviously that does not mean that you are communist. Reading books does not mean that you are a communist. Here we have a very suspicious math problem going on that this fellow's pulling out of the trash can. So just kind of emphasizing the craziness that went on when targeting people in the education field. So elementary and high school teachers were investigated, and many lost their jobs because they were named by anti-subversive groups and individuals. So blacklists became very common during this time, and Hollywood is, the most famous place for that. But other professions had it as well, and frightened employers who feared being blacklisted themselves, would just decide, well, I'm just not going to hire this person, or I'm, not going to employ this person because they're on this list. So blacklisting. All right, next comic. All right. So this one may be a little tougher if you don't have historical context. But again, same kind of time period. So 1950 was when this comic came out. And it centers around a figure known as Joseph McCarthy. And McCarthyism was the term that was coined to explain his rhetoric and his mission that he was trying to engage in. So, you probably know that the elephant is meant to represent the GOP, the Republican Party, and in this case, poor little Republican Party is looking at this very, very unstable platform that McCarthy has kind of built his legacy on, and is saying, wait, really? You want me to be associated with that? You want me to stand on that platform? And these other individuals, Gabrielson, Bridges, Taft, Wary, those are all senators who were closely aligned with McCarthy. So even though the Republican Party didn't necessarily, for many Republicans, did not agree with McCarthy's philosophy or his tactics or, kind of what he stood for, they were sort of pushed along by people who did capitalize on McCarthy's kind of fear-based ideology. So, Senator Joseph McCarthy claimed in 1950 that he held in his hand a list of 205 communists in the State Department, which he did not reveal. So he never actually revealed these names. And the number of communists in the State Department changed, every time that he made this speech, this kind of fear-mongering speech that he had. There's 205, and then there's only 57, and then there's 134, and it was very, very nebulous kind of claims. So some members of Congress, Wary, Taft, Bridges, and Gabrielson, supported his tactics because it was politically advantageous. Capitalizing on people's fears is a good way to get elected, unfortunately. So they kind of pushed along the rest of the party, even though the rest of the party didn't necessarily support McCarthy. And this comic was the first use of the word McCarthyism. So he became more than just a person, he was an ism. All right, next up. All right. I'm sure you probably figured out. Once again, we have the House of Un-American Activities, and they are producing new and important evidence. But the evidence, of course, is some graffiti on a fence. So, calling into question the quality of the evidence that the House of Un-American Activities and Joseph McCarthy were producing for these anti-communist trials that they put on. So the special committee investigated McCarthy's evidence that he was putting forth, and the hearings became a bit of a mess, kind of chaotic. Charge after charge, obscuring the fact that these earlier accusations didn't actually have anything to support them. And even though the committee completely discredited his tactics and evidence, he somehow emerged with more support than before. So treating rumors and unsupported charges as evidence was kind of the hallmark of his tactics that he was employing, unfortunately. Okay, next comic. All right, lots of things happening here. So this individual is meant to represent Joseph McCarthy. So this was his kind of comic version. And he, of course, is mounting a huge smear campaign against people who he's labeled as, communist forces. Franco and Chiang, those were foreign leaders that were mounting anti-communist movements in Italy and China, I believe. So obviously, if you didn't support those leaders, then you were un-American because communism is not America. So part of the smear campaign. And of course, McCarthy is coming after the State Department, which he claims holds, hundreds of communists, though he can't actually really produce any of them. Our civil rights are being threatened here. So we see this little hunched fellow like, oh God, must protect the rights. The rights are in danger. And people coming after the civil rights. We have Another, constitutional right petition, people running from the petition. Oh no, can't be seen to sign a petition. I might be dragged before the committee. And then this little fella down here said, say, whatever happened to freedom from fear? So all of these freedoms in America seem to be, being threatened, and everyone is afraid and doesn't want to speak out because of this fear. So lots and lots of symbolic elements here in front of the White House, of course. So, President Harry Truman spoke out against scaremongers and hate mongers, trying to create fear and suspicion among us by the use of slander, unproved accusations, and just plain lies. So, even our presidents were not necessarily in favor, of this particular element of our history. All right, next one. All right. So you may once again recognize the ugly mug of Joseph McCarthy, who was the senator for Wisconsin. And here we have this smear wagon, sort of a take on the bandwagon, because everyone's jumping on it. Oh, well, we don't support McCarthyism, but this guy's a winner. Jump on the bandwagon with the winner. And oh, well, we believe in decency, but want to get on that winning train. So Joseph McCarthy's success was tempting for a lot of senators. They didn't like what he was doing, but they couldn't deny the results he was getting, that he was getting the votes and he was becoming politically powerful and successful. And some of them kind of abandoned their morals a bit to jump on that smear wagon. So, tactics, obviously, not terribly responsible. And McCarthy himself was a veteran, but he was a non-combat veteran who used the nickname Tail Gunner Joe to win a Senate seat after the war. So even though he did not actually serve in combat, he capitalized on his status as a veteran to get his position, which is, not the most ethical thing, of course. And then anti-communism became his tactic for re-election. So the other politicians jumped on the bandwagon and attacked the Truman administration as Truman was, fighting a war against communist aggression in Korea. They, criticized him. He's not doing enough. He's not, being effective. All right, and next up. All right, so the only thing you may not have known is who this was meant to represent. After Truman, there was Ike, President Eisenhower, and this is his cartoon visage. So McCarthy pictured sitting in the White House with Ike, signing for him. Foreign policy and national issues and the GOP political plans, as if Ike had no power compared to this senator from Wisconsin. So one of the reasons that Eisenhower was elected was because of the fear of communism. He was Republican, and that reassured a lot of people who were afraid of communism in the United States. But he never took an active stand against McCarthy. So, even though he, of course, was not for communism, he did not support McCarthy's tactics, but didn't feel strong enough or powerful enough to speak out against McCarthy and his tactics. All right, and next. All right, pretty straightforward here. McCarthy, once again, slightly different cartoon visage, is holding hardcore, solid evidence, of communist activity in the United States. But again, the evidence is all faked. It is fake news, and he has nothing to stand on. And sort of, liar, liar, pants on fire kind of imagery here with the fire, flaming in his hand. So, 1954. McCarthy took on the United States Army, accusing the Army of promoting communists, and that was a big mistake. The hearings, known as the Army McCarthy hearings, were televised, allowing the nation to see McCarthy's tactics. And McCarthy submitted evidence that was identified as fraudulent. He submitted complete, nonsense, rubbish. And everyone got to see him bullying, people from the army, and, individuals who were trying to testify. And that kind of was the beginning of the end for him. He was censured by his colleagues for conduct unbecoming a senator. So that was the beginning of the end for Joseph McCarthy. All right, and this last one, I'll be interested if you can interpret anything here. All right, so the anti-communists went after Hollywood, they went after educators, and near the end, they went after the Girl Scouts. So the Illinois Department of the American Legion put forth a resolution condemning the Girl Scouts of America. Of course, Joseph McCarthy here on the flag. And I like this too, this little touch here, how to detect subversion and witchcraft. Emphasizing, of course, that this anti-communist sentiment had become a little bit of a witch hunt, that, people were being put on trial for no really good reason, and it was just rubbish. When you go after the Girl Scouts, it's just getting a little ridiculous, right? So anyways, in the summer of 1954, the American Legion denounced the Girl Scouts because of their one world ideas, which apparently was felt to be un-American. Anything implying, unity as opposed to individualism had the potential to turn into, oh my God, communism. So yeah, that was a bit much. Anyways, so those are your visual interpretations and kind of your introduction to communism in America. Now, further introduction, more communism. So some facts and figures for you here. From the Red Scare that took over after World War II. In 1950s America, at the close of the war, you would think that people could relax, calm down, but alas, the evil communists were coming to take your freedom. Your freedom are belong to us. So, very, very terrifying time for many people in the United States. The fear of communism. So this little video here, I'll let you watch it on your own, but I just think it's rather entertaining. Really serious video, how to identify communists in your family, and if people do these things, these are the signs of communism. So little propaganda video for you there, in case you're interested. And this is the item I was referring to earlier, McCarthy versus Army. So this is 1954, kind of a turning point in Joseph McCarthy's power and popularity. And Joseph Welch, who was the attorney for the Army, was, of course, kind of going head-to-head with McCarthy. And this video that I have here kind of shows what is almost identified as the moment, the turning point, where people started to really lose faith and lose respect for McCarthy and what he was trying to do. So before this, they may have been convinced by, his accusations and his insistence that our country was in danger and being infiltrated by communists. But here it was just kind of like, oh, come on, man. Could you just be a decent human? Why are you such a jerk? So this is the, wow, he's such a jerk moment kind of laid out for you from that particular trial. So you can take a look at that as well. All right, so Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy's first position was actually that of a district court judge, but he fought a dirty campaign. So back in the cute little 1940s and stuff, dirty campaigns were not as common. Nowadays, we'd be pretty shocked if we had a campaign that didn't have some dirt to it, but he published campaign literature that falsely claimed that his opponent, Edgar Werner, was 73 when he was actually 66, so making him seem that he was senile, too old, incompetent, and also implied that he was guilty of financial corruption. So that's how he got his first success, was smearing his opponent. So when the Second World War happened, he joined the U.S. Marines, where, of course, he had a non-combat role. He ran against Robert La Follette to become the Republican candidate for the Senate for the state of Wisconsin. His campaign posters pictured him in full fighting gear with an aviator's cap and belt upon belt of machine gun ammunition wrapped around his bulky torso. So he claimed that he had completed 32 missions when he actually had a desk job and only flew in training exercises. So exploiting the respect that people have for veterans to get his Senate position, ew, gross, bad. He also smeared his opponent, attacked La Follette for not enlisting during the war. La Follette had been 46 when Pearl Harbor had been bombed. He was too old to join the armed services. McCarthy also claimed that his opponent made profits from his investments while he had been away fighting for his country, and accused him of war profiteering, essentially, when his investments actually had been in a radio station and had nothing to do with anything. So anyways, McCarthy won, and his opponent was deeply hurt by the false claims made against him, retired, and later committed suicide. So, McCarthy, his first day in the Senate, he called a press conference where he proposed a solution to a coal strike taking place at the time. And he called for the striking miners to be drafted into the Army. And if those men still refused to mine the coal, he said they should be court-martialed for insubordination and shot. So he was out for blood from day one. Really, really hardcore kind of law and order philosophy, and absolutely no mercy for people who did not fall in line. So his legacy, McCarthyism, is not synonymous with anti-communism. It now connotes government corruption, smear tactics, unethical accusation, and a witch hunt that changed the face of our nation. So that's kind of the background of communism in America. And the reason that that is important is because the Crucible, though it on the surface has very little to do with communism, has some very interesting undertones that understanding the communist fears of the time will help clarify. So The Crucible was written by Arthur Miller, a lovely author back in the day. So pretty famous for his time. You know, some authors only get famous after they die or whatever, but Arthur Miller was very well known. In 1949, he wrote the play Death of a Salesman, which became very, very successful. Lovely play, kind of dark, but lovely play. He was called to testify before the House of Un-American Activities, which you can probably see where this is going. But of course, the most important thing about him, he was married to Marilyn Monroe. So there's Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe looking cute together at a party. So their marriage was ultimately not successful, but this definitely was Marilyn's most long-term relationship. So that's something. So when Arthur Miller refused to testify in front of the House of Un-American Activities, he was part of the portion of Hollywood that was blacklisted. And that blacklist lasted until 1960. So 1956 is when he was called before the HUAC. And he said, I could not use the name of another person and bring trouble on him. So in May of 1957, he was found guilty of contempt of Congress. He was sentenced to a $500 fine or 30 days in prison, blacklisted, and had his passport withdrawn so he could not travel abroad. So in a 1949 book, The Devil in Massachusetts by Marion Lena Starkey, Arthur Miller wrote that he thought that there was a living connection between himself and Salem, which is the site of the Salem witch trials, which is the topic of The Crucible, and between Salem and Washington. For whatever else they might be, I saw that the hearings in Washington were profoundly and even avowedly ritualistic. After all, in almost every case, the committee knew in advance what they wanted the witness to give them, the names of his comrades in the party. The FBI had long since infiltrated the party, and informers had long ago identified the participants in various meetings. The main point of the hearings, precisely as in 17th century Salem, was that the accused make public confession, damn his confederates as well as his devil master, and guarantee his sterling new allegiance by breaking disgusting old vows, whereupon he was let loose to rejoin the society of extremely decent people. So Arthur Miller very early on saw that the House of Un-American Activities trials, they were a witch hunt, and he was inspired to investigate the Salem witch trials and to write his own version of those events, which he felt mirrored what was happening in his country at that time. So, on Broadway, since The Crucible is a play, it had some interesting reception. So it did win a Tony Award for the Best Play in 1953, but when the New York audience realized the connection, as the theme of the play was revealed, Arthur Miller writes, an invisible sheet of ice formed over their heads, thick enough to skate on. In the lobby at the end, people with whom I had some fairly close professional acquaintanceships passed me by as though I were invisible. So it's a little frosty once people realized that he was, maligning the House of Un-American Activities trials, but that's what it is. So the title Crucible. The word crucible has several definitions, but one obviously is going to feature more than others. So a crucible is a container made of a substance that can resist great heat for melting, fusing, or calcining ores, metals. It is the hollow at the bottom of an ore furnace where the molten metal collects. So it does have connotations of fire, of being burned, as of course witches were often burned. But our third definition will be the most appropriate, a severe test or trial. So to go through a crucible, to go through the fire, to go through this great test is something that Arthur Miller puts his characters through, and something that he felt he himself went through as a result of the House of Un-American Activities. All right, so that is your background for the Crucible, and yes, you shall learn more at the end of this week and into next week about the events of the Crucible and the rhetoric that Arthur Miller uses to persuade us that these witch hunts are immoral and unethical and bad.